There is a boy in all of us who learned how to wander early, not because we were lost, but because stillness did not feel safe. So we kept moving between places, between versions of ourselves. We learned how to survive by staying in motion, how to search without knowing what we were looking for. This space is for us, for the part of us that kept walking when we needed rest. You are welcome here, wandering ones, and you can join us at the healing table.
What up, peeps? It's really good seeing y'all. It's been a hot second between since last all three of us got together.
Yeah.
Um, Talked to Adam a little bit earlier before you hopped on, Grow, and this is what really came to mind. I actually been thinking about this for a while, and I'm gonna ask y'all some questions, but the topic I'm really been holding close to me is like, who holds us? Black and brown man's pain and healing. Oftentimes we're holding other people up, but like who's holding us? And so the first question is, when you think about your inner child, where did you learn that he needed to be fixed instead of seen? And how did that belief shape the way you show up as a man today?
So I think for me, if I jump, there's a lot you said here. Like even before I get to this question, if I think about the first thing that you said, which was who holds us, right? And I think that's at the root of these other questions in terms of this inner child. And so if we think about the stuff that we've talked about in our conversations, which are the expectations that are placed upon us as early as being a boy.
Mm,
Right. So there is no place, there is no person, and there's no place because we're told to shut down our emotions. Right. Little boys don't cry. And nobody's, when the moment they tell us this, that signals that there's nobody who, to your top question, is holding space for us and how we feel.
Mm.
And I think that early framing of what this space that people call this inner child, I think for me is where that inner child comes from, which is the actual child of us. Nobody's meeting us there. And so then there's the suppression that's happening. So I like to talk about being buried and not being broken. And so if I'm not broken, then I don't need to be fixed, right? Because if I'm buried, I just need to be, if you want to say seen, right? I need to be unburied. And so if I shift now to this question, I think this question for me resonates a little bit differently in the sense of if I just think about it on the surface. I think what I learned about this whole notion of inner child was in a therapy session maybe 6 or 7 years ago. But then that resonated, well, not resonated, but that sort of corresponded to things that I had read about this sort of inner child piece. I think one of the things that I learned that didn't just mesh well with me is this sort of sense of I needed to do something to my inner child as if me and my inner child were separate. And
mm.
so there's this space for me. I there's no part where okay, my inner child stops at 14 and all of a sudden I'm in this. Like, what is that line, right? To sort of this. And so as I started to sort of go through that sort of exercise of trying to figure out when people say to you, you need to love your inner child. Well, what part of me am I hugging? That's my inner child. Versus, is it not me just tending to my trauma? Is it not me just giving some space for it to breathe, let it out, picking up new habits in the process where, for instance, I go hiking, right, to let my mind sort of release, right? And so I had a session that I actually have it recorded, and I'm in a meditative session, and I'm reconciling to myself that there is no such thing as an inner child that is somehow separate than me. And so what I
Mm.
said to myself was is that there's no inner child here. There's stuff that I went through in my childhood that I didn't have the words or the sort of tools to sort of express and deal with. Now that I have these things here, there is no sort of inner child. So I'm not reconciling these two versions of me. If at some point I came out of some box and now I morphed into this other space, I'm the same being, right? The soul that is in me now, the heart that's in me now, it's the same heart that was developing over time. So when I think about this inner child piece, I don't think it's anything that needs to be fixed. And if I would fix anything, I would fix how we talk about this inner child. And I think the seeing part is for us to realize that I think the piece that we need to see is that what I went through, what we all went through in our childhood, isn't it isn't away from us somehow. It's with us, which means the reconciliation that's happening isn't some inner child versus some adult child. And I think if I say it this way, in the parts of my life where I have gotten tools to heal myself, or I'm on that healing journey, the places where I'm unhealed aren't some separate parts of me. I'm still the same being. It's the same mind. It's the same heart. It's the same place where oxygen come in. There is no division inside of me except the division of what I'm aware of and what I'm not aware of. And so I would say that in this inner child piece, I struggle with this definition of inner child because if I think about inner child, maybe I characterize it a different way, which is it's the parts of me that I just haven't touched that haven't been healed. It's the parts of me that are buried that I haven't yet done the digging to uncover. I don't think that there's any inner childness there. There may be a youthfulness of healing, right, where I've got a long way to go because I just started chipping at this thing. And so if we want to talk about inner child as in terms of the inner part of the onion, okay, fine. But let's not talk about it as some separate thing that needs to be reconciled. And I don't know if maybe in my initial components of getting inner child where the therapist used to say to me, well, you need to go to your inner child and you need to hug your inner child. What? It's my inner child, like the one that's suffering. I'm suffering. So for me, it was this space where I was going, why they keep sending me to this inner child thing? And I'm the one that's sort of right here now. And how am I tapping into this inner child in any way differently than me tapping into a traumatic story and event that I'm actually going through and processing to get the right framing from? So I'm gonna stop there, but it's interesting that you brought this up because I've been sort of toying with this sense of, am I the only person that kind of have an issue with this whole inner child concept? Even though it's obviously we know it's rooted into some research, but I just can't see how there's somehow some inner child in me that somehow had a separate whole, separate heart or separate soul or separate lungs. And this is me. I'm 48 now. That this is the same body 40 years ago. It's just grew. So this sense of inner child, I just can't separate it from, are we just talking about basic traumas and basic healing? And we've labeled something that is now giving us this sort of space of where, if I think about this, if I say this question this way, when you think about your inner child, where did you learn that he needed to be fixed instead of seen, or how has that belief shaped the way you show up as a man? Before anybody tells you this sort of notion of a inner child, what experiences are you having that you feel like that there's some sense of two of you, or there's this sense of a inner child version of you that is what just simply hasn't matured? So I don't know. I don't know if I'm taking y'all on some other tangent down some old rabbit hole, but I think this is where, when I think about the inner child, and so I don't think it shapes me as a man because I don't think I had, even before that first therapy session, some sense of an unresolved inner child in me that is causing these things, which is, if you say that that is the equivalent of unresolved traumas, then okay, I can meet you at that definition. But unresolved trauma and your inner child are two separate things, because in some ways, I think the inner child is this space where you are not loved. And how do you go back and love that part of that younger version of you so that you know that you were always lovable versus a trauma, something happened to you external to you. And is it something external that happens to you that creates the inner child syndrome? Like, where does the inner child syndrome root from? And how do I ended up getting it? Because again, I know if I had this conversation with my mama, she'd be like, "What the fuck you talking about?" she'd be lost at this whole concept of an inner child, right? And so, anyways, I'll pause there. See where y'all pick up at.
Coach?
Yeah. That's deep, Grow. And you went in different directions. And I
Yeah, you
appreciate
see
that, man.
how internally confused I am.
Maybe a smidget, a scotch, maybe a scotch there a little bit. Um, yeah, I'm a little aligned to you. I might see it a little differently in terms of that. And when I look at this question, it made me think immediately of the inner child who needs to be fixed is asking what's wrong with me. The inner child who needs to be seen, per se, is asking what's happening inside of me.
Mm.
I was never one who needed to be fixed because, like, Grow, I wasn't fucking broken. Maybe things around me were. We talk about our healing table that we host here as men, as Black and brown men. Maybe the table I was, the foundation of the table wasn't steady, per se, right in that space. I believe when I think of the inner child, and my alignment with Grow is that it's hard to, and it took me a minute. It took me a minute to identify, but it
Mm-hmm.
took a certain amount of emotional intelligence to identify as well. It's like time and emotional intelligence growth for me to really put it in concept for myself in this. And that inner child being me at 14, and I could pinpoint it. So my inner child isn't like this, younger age 3 to 10, whatever you want to call it. It is exactly 14 because that is exactly when trauma, change in my life, unmet care. I'm gonna say
Mm-hmm.
that again.
Mm-hmm.
Unmet care. A care that a 14-year-old deserves,
Mm.
right? A guidance, a structure, right? Those things were all fucking broken, but it wasn't me, right? And I think the beautiful thing about that, it took me a minute, like Grow, you mentioned in your I don't know if it was yoga or meditation. Sorry, meditation session. You were starting to like really do some serious level healing,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And like you recently, I just went through this. We had a segment, and before the segment happened, we were talking, and I shared with both of you brothers that I've been grieving with my moms,
Mm-hmm.
and that grief for my mother has a face, it has a timeline, it has things that are tangible for that grief for me to identify the deepness, the sadness, all the parts of it, right? But this other grief that I've been feeling is like, it is not that. It's not my mom's grief. It's not
Right.
that. I know that because I know that grief. And I started to synthesize my own thoughts to a degree here. And I said this to Easy, and that was really reflecting and maybe almost coaching myself a little bit, but also deeply just kind of tapping into myself in my emotional intelligence that has grown over the years, that allows me to think differently.
Mm-hmm.
Because before I was running with my immediate reactive thought, now I am so proactive with it that I'm going to 2, 3, 4 chapters before I'm landing. It might take me a little more time, but I'm thinking about it, right? And I'm thinking of different ways. So this is how it came to me that I was like, where's this pain coming? Where's this grief coming from?
Yeah.
And I thought about this 14-year-old boy where everything around him was broken. The man that he searched for all his life, he finally moved in with him, and that man just put a shotgun to his face.
Wow.
That man lost everything while he was trying to obtain me. And that 14-year-old boy grabbed all that was broken and walked the streets of Chicago,
Trying to make sense of it.
right? Trying to survive,
Yeah.
trying to stay alive,
Yeah.
loving through logic, as I shared with Easy. I didn't know how to love. I was loving logically because I was trying to fucking survive. So when I
Mm-hmm.
think of this question, no, I wasn't broken. I was surviving. And it makes me think, and I said this to to Mike, Grow before you came on, that it made me think when I thought about that, I had the greatest cry.
Mm.
And I said to myself, it just came to me, the epiphany per se, or a moment of clarity, as alcoholics have. They have a moment of clarity. I had a moment of clarity. And that moment of clarity was to tell the 14-year-old boy, not that it's okay, it's going to get better. Oh, I'm fine now. Look at me now. I'm older. None of that shit mattered. I need to tell that young man, you don't have to wander tonight.
Mm.
You can stay here. And that
Mm.
that took a lot. It took a lot to say, but it healed me so much, y'all. It's throughout that whole process, and I know Grow relates. Nobody never recognized it. It was never seen.
Facts.
It was invisible.
Yep.
Because everything else was broken. And all that person needs, that 14-year-old inner child, is companionship, is to say, hey, you ain't got to walk tonight. You don't have to wander.
Mm.
You're safe here. I see you. And I think the beautiful thing about that is that I did have that, y'all, eventually. But I lived in it so long that it's still there. So when I think of that inner child, it's the 14-year-old who went through those things, right? And how it shows up, because I want to land my plane here, how it shows up in this man today is how I just shared with y'all. It shows up why this man is able to tell that 14-year-old, you don't have to wander tonight. You can stay here.
Mm.
You're safe. I'm gonna land there, y'all.
Hey, Coach,
Well,
thank you for everything that you just gave us in that. The harmonic resonance for me was really deep here because I think part of the story that I didn't share about that meditative experience is that in that meditative experience, I said to myself, I'm going to reconcile this notion of it being some inner child versus me. Coach, when I listened to you, and I think this is what resonated as you were speaking, is that when we get past that point of when the trauma happened, or that point that we remember it. So I love how you're talking about that 14-year-old version of yourself. There's it's that's the part where I struggle with in the sense of, is it my inner child? Or am I going back to the point of that trauma experience, right? In this case, that 14-year-old boy, and saying, well, let me look at this from a different view now. Because the view that I had at that time only gave me this view. Right now, that if I look at it, if I talk to, I got a session with Mike, and Mike is like, well, Nair, let's go back to this time and let's think through this. And then if I say to myself, I wasn't the adult who said those words to me. I wasn't the adult who left me in this house, right? I wasn't the man who, for whatever reason, is not a part of my life. That the outcomes of that became my lived experience, to why, Coach, you and I say we're not broken. And so if I come into this is my child. Do I have an inner baby as a child? Because if if as a child, I'm not reconciling anything with the inner baby version of me, why is it as an adult, I'm thinking about the inner child version of me? And what happens when I'm a teen? Am I a teen? Am I thinking about the inner child version of me then? Like there's so many iterations of this thing that I sort of think about, especially, Coach, I love that example you give, because I think I think when I moved to Chicago, knowing that somebody else was moving me, complete corporate relocation, turning that key, I had that response that you have. My mama don't got to sleep just in random places in Chicago anymore.
Mm-hmm.
My thought process of when I was, well, not my thought process, but my lived experience in my first 7 years of being homeless in Chicago are no longer no more. Was I healing a inner child, or was I evolving in my lived experience to be able to say that wasn't mine and it didn't serve me? So, am I creating a healthier inner child who remains? At some point, the inner child must become one with the version of us now. And I think that's where, when I see this inner child kind of thing and I think about Coach and the story that you gave us, thinking about that 14-year-old boy, that was a lived experience for you, not some outer body experience that happened. You can still resonate and touch it because your heart, your actual soul was right there at the same time. So it's starting to coalesce for me that this inner child seems to be this bucket of unresolved traumas that we're saying. And even if that trauma is, this was a place where, Coach, what was the word you used? Was it
Unmet
unmet,
care.
unmet care? As if there's an inner child, the actual trauma that is unmet care. Well, in my quote unquote adult life, or when I get the words and I get the tools and I now start to say, here's what this looks like for me, I then start to build, what does me meeting my needs look like? And if I'm doing that for myself, I'm not healing some inner child in some way. Because if I heal the inner child and that makes peace within me, then that's not some separate inner child. We got to reconcile at some point that this inner child and my being are one and the same, and they didn't have these two separate experiences, because one was in, if I say it in this way, my inner child was not my pre-butterfly experience as a worm. And now all of a sudden I got a different body, and now all of a sudden I got these wings, and now all of a sudden I got my wing version of me, and I'm looking at the worm version, and I'm making some sense. Well, that inner worm it's still part of your body right here. you didn't leave it. It's still with you, right? And so there's a part of this inner child that I feel like there's this space where something is disconnected, as if it's something separate, and it's not one and the same. Because, Coach, when I listened to you and you said that last part, I have somewhere to go.
Mm-hmm.
You were tapping into the part of you who was afraid of not having somewhere to go, because you know what that lived experience is like. It's like somebody who's been abused by somebody, and they feel some kind of way when that person's in their energy, or when that person's in their space. That person didn't molest you as an adult, molested you then. The physical body, you're still in the same physical body. It has grown, but it's not as if your body and your mind stopped at a point in time where you're only thinking as a 13-year-old child at this point. There's a point where, when you go to heal and you start to go in yourself, Coach, to your point, if I'm going in myself, this is not some inner child, it's some separate version of me. And so if we're going to, again, use the word inner child, where it's the traumas that happen, the conditioning that happened before you, which I think gets into the heart of your question, which is, how have those beliefs shaped you? I don't think the average person is going to resonate with this whole notion of an inner child. I think this inner child is something that happens in the healing space when we start to talk about it. But outside of the healing spaces, this is the shit I grew up with, and I'm here now presenting with these symptoms. And so when you ask somebody what they believe and why they believe it, they're just going to go back to their childhood and say who told them or what this is. that's this concept of an inner child isn't going to necessarily resonate on the whole, because I think it's a particular language that I think in my mind, again, as I continue to sort of wrestle with this, it just feels like it's as if we're parking lot in something, and 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 that's not how the soul works, if that makes sense, or how the heart works. This is the same heart I was born with, right? Whatever it experienced, there's no inner version of my heart, right? Now there's some compartmentalization in my heart where I tuck some feelings aside and put some. That's not an inner child, though. So again, maybe I'm having my own semantics issues with the version of inner child. But when I again, as I think about the experience, coach, that you had in that instance, I've had a similar instance. Mike, I'm sure when you start to sort of jump in this, you're going to sort of talk about that space. But there's a moment where, if you think about this inner child and sort of the experience, and in the sense of, if in the moment I hug that inner child, I actually feel love for myself. Am I calling myself a child that I got to hug the child version of me to feel love? Something feels weird, because if I get to your first question, Mike, which is who takes on our problems, or where do we go? I got to figure that out as a 48-year-old man, not thinking about some child version of myself. I got to be thinking about what is the whole version of me needing in this sense. Even if I unpack it and go, well, this happened when I was a kid and I've carried it all this time. Now I'm letting it go. I am the person who has evolved over time. It is the same heart, the same soul, right? It is the same brain. And so this inner child is, in a way, I, I don't know that it gets into the heart of, coach, that experience you had or the experience that I had as being homeless. Because I don't think about that experience being rooted in the fact that it happened because I was a child, more so than my mom was 16 when she had me and she wasn't ready, right? She didn't have her own place, right? And this is me. I I struggle with reconciling sort of where that is. So
Well, several things. Adam, thank you for your vulnerability. And like, I will be honest, selfishly, like when I heard you when we were talking before Grow was like when you said that, that like it shook me, and it I was like, that's deep. And I literally got chills, and I was like, I was thinking in my head, that's it right there. I should have just recorded Adam. And the other thing, coach, and I'm just going to say this, and this is a little bit off topic, like this also shows who you are
yeah,
and how dope you are. And I was just like, that's why I fuck with coach.
that I'm drawn to this guy. Yep.
Like it was is like in that moment, it's like your amazingness just, yeah, I'm like, dang, now I'm getting emotional. Dang, like I feel that. I
Yeah.
was in that experience, and I just wonder how many men are in this experience in this moment or have experienced something similar to you. As far as like the question, I look at inner child, I guess a little bit differently. I don't see it as separate whatsoever. I do think you need to be intentional with finding where the harm started,
Yes.
because the, they talk about in mental health and other different psychology and things like that. When you had a high traumatic experience, when you're in another traumatic experience, you're taken back to that state of mind. And so if you're not intentional with healing, you could be taken back to states of mind when you're a adult. So what you have as an inner child or in your younger years, you can bring to adulthood if you're not intentional with healing. So like how coach like uh uh, analyze himself to say, what did this what did 14-year-old Adam, not necessarily inner child, 14-year-old Adam need, and what it was 14-year-old Adam experiencing, and I'm going to tell me what I need. And like I think you hit the nail on the head, some grow healing the, the younger part of me heals the older part of me simultaneously.
Yes.
Because it's not like, oh, just because inner child's healed now, I'm not healed. Like, no, it's all in one. I totally agree with that. I think where I'm really coming from is what I want people to really know that is what y'all said several times, like you're not broken.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We are not broken, especially black and brown men. I think I'll speak for myself. There was times in my life I used to ask God, like, what's wrong with me? Why do I feel this way? Why am I so sensitive? Why is all these things? But I had to realize I did just what you did, coach. And I was like, where did I, where did Happy Mike stop being so happy? And so I went back to that time and I was like, oh, I just needed more confidence. And so like those same things that I told Mike at 10 years old, I tell Mike at 46 years old, you're dope. You got this. Keep pushing. Because those are the same things that got me from that stage to this stage. And so it's rinse, wash, repeat when lives. And so with all that, I'm going to jump into the next question.
Wait,
Um,
well, before you jump into the next question, because I think you you're prompting something sort of in me as you're talking about sort of the singularity of being, right? And so when I think about the stuff that we tell our 10-year-old self, it's all you know at your 10-year-old self. So when you talked about how did we get there, right? Where did Mike lose that sense of right happiness? This is where I get back into my deconditioning space. Because the conditions that was around us were not teaching us how to deal with the experiences that we were going through. Church was telling us to go pray if you went to church. But how is that prayer going to deal with the bully at school? How is that prayer going to deal with me not having confidence in myself? How is that prayer going to sort of everybody was clowning me about my clothes, right? How is that prayer going to help me with like that's not what they give you about prayer, right? They give you prayers as if it's this magical bullet, but so many of us who've grown up in the church struggle with this space of healing because that wasn't what prayer did for us. So when you say that sort of space of, I'm saying the same things to myself at 46 as if I was saying to myself at 10. If I ask myself at 10, where did I even get the seeds to pour into myself or to root with myself? This is where, Coach, that piece that you talk about, that is it unmet care? That's
Mhm.
the space where unmet care is. There's a space where whatever your parents had. And so whenever we talk about healing, I, it's a little troublesome for me to have the conversations about healing without conversations around when do you start to get your first set of tools to start to heal? Because what ends up happening, nobody told me I even should even see a therapist in my life. So the fact that my mom had me a month after she turned 16, sent me to live with my grandparents at the age of 7. Nobody sat me down and said, "Hey, Nair, you should talk to somebody." So this is what I mean by that inner child piece. I don't know what to do, and I didn't know what to do. the time that I was molested. I don't know that I had words of knowing what any of that stuff was. What I did know is that the place that I was at was the place that my mama dropped me off at and said I was safe. Later on in life, realizing the same thing happened to my mom. My grandmother dropped her off at a place that she thought that was supposed to be safe. So when you talk about that coach, that unmet care, that wasn't unmet care on my mom's side. She was doing what she thought that I was supposed to be able to trust these people. And what happened on the other side of that? Now, again, at the age I was at, pre-7, do I have the words to tell my mom about the experience that's happening?
Mm-mm.
I'm certainly not. I'm certainly not the person who's breaking myself. So the thing that we know how to do is to bury ourselves because we're now trying to protect ourselves. So this inner child piece, again, if we're going to talk about burying the stuff that happens to us before we get the words, before we get the healing tools, fine, I can say that. But to me, that's not an inner child. That's a vault that just needs to be open. And so again, when I think about this sort of inner childness, I want to disconnect this sense of even if I am telling myself some things that I learned at 10 and 40 at 46, what we would hope, speaking from the healing table, is that the types of things that you are telling yourself at 10 are the things that feed into you in terms of self-love, which is what you said, Mike. I'm telling myself that I'm dope, right? Telling myself that I got this. But there are people who are still telling themselves the same messages at 10 because they haven't gotten any new words. Not that there's an inner child here, but nobody has been able to get to them to say, hey, here's a space where you can just talk and breathe and let go. And this is why when we talk about therapy, and when I think about sort of the tension between religion and therapy, religion doesn't give you a space to just go and talk about your stuff. It's a space where it tells you what you should be doing, what the rubric should look like, and that if you do all these things, this thing is going to be, stuff is going to work for you in this way, which we all know in the actual occurrence of life is not that simple. On the other side, you have, once I get some heal tools, I have a different set of language that I can now use. And I think that when I think about this conversation that we're asking, which is, where do men go or who does it? We're starting from the deficit of absence. And so if we're starting from the absence in the sense of the world, our parents, the world around us does not even tell us we can be soft with ourselves, let alone soft with the world around us, let alone that the world around us can be soft to meet us because the world around us says the moment that they see us soft, you need to harden up. I don't know that there's this inner childness in the sense of, I guess when I say inner child, well, I guess as I'm thinking about this and I think inner child, when you think about your inner trauma, what did you learn to hide from the trauma? What did you learn to hide from yourself so you wasn't seeing through the lens of the trauma? Right? These are these things that we start to end up starting to put themselves there. Because, Mike, if I pick up here and I give this back to you sort of here, is that when you say you needed more confidence, what was the conditions that was telling you that you were not confident enough? What was that you didn't create those spaces to be in a position to tell yourself you needed more confidence? That unmet care, coach, I'm loving this term. Where was that care to say, hey, you're learning how to walk and you're doing a good job? We don't even get that simplicity in our growth from being a boy to a teen, from a teen to a young male, from a young, we don't get those messages. So we're always having to tell ourselves some stuff. But then if I think about what we tell ourselves, we got to ask the question, where do I get the words to know how to talk to myself?
So a couple of things. One, I don't think we're have enough time for the next question.
Which is hopefully because we're doing this, guys, we don't have to get through all the questions. We pick up the next topic right with that question because I'm interested in what you've got to say here, Mike. Because I've been wrestling with this, so I
Yeah,
mean, this.
I can see that you're wrestling with it, and here's like what I would say to some of that. Like there isn't space. It isn't there isn't space for man to there isn't a lot of space for man to heal versus not versus that's the reason why we're doing this to wrestle with some things. And Grow, I also want to thank you for being super vulnerable about some of your experiences. And for me, when I'm talking about inner child, and you named it, like when you're younger, you don't have all the skills to deal with traumatic experiences,
Mhm.
situations that you're going through in a logical, forward thinking space.
Right.
Your body's in fight or flight, you're in
Yep.
survival. And so you're surviving. And so I should also name that younger part of you that survived gets credit for surviving. Period.
Mhm.
We don't talk about that.
But yes, yes, yes.
That so you get credit for surviving to making it this far. And so like when the first question, like you don't need to be fixed because you survived. You don't. And the things that you buried, the things that you put dirt on, the things that you didn't know how to process, regardless of how old you are, it comes with you if you don't process it. The
Mhm.
skeletons in the closet stay skeletons in the closet until you open the damn closet. Period. And it's like the other thing that keeps like coming to me is like forgiving yourself, being graceful with yourself. Like a lot of times, I'll speak for myself, like some of my experiences that had nothing to do with me somehow became my fault.
Yeah, because we have no words to know otherwise. Yes.
And so it's just like, well, Mike, you should whatever. And it's like
Hmm.
I think like if we're going to say there's a process, like the first process is giving yourself grace and forgiving yourself, and owning like this ain't your shit.
Hmm.
The- First and foremost, and then it's like what Coach did is like saying like what does what does younger Mike and older Mike really need in this moment? Because they're one and the same, right, Grow?
That's right.
They're one and the same. And like in all honesty, saying it out loud and feeling all those emotions, like Coach said he had a good cry, is healing. When you say things and bring it to light, that's taking the skeletons out of the closet. And there's too many people I see walking around thinking that they're hiding skeletons, and it's in plain sight to me by their actions, how they love, how they talk, how they dismiss their relationships with God, with their relationship with their spouses, their relationship with their kids. So I think this is just like one of those things that it's so layered in a way that one, there's no right or wrong answer, but it's layered in so much in a way that everybody's on their own journey and everybody's
Hmm.
going to experience something different. Um, and like the question I ask when I'm coaching is like, how's your heart? And like that's like when I'm really thinking about inner child or how young, like wherever that trauma state is, like I'm like, how was Mike Sykes' heart then? Was it a little cold? Was it dark? Was it joyful? And like I ask myself every day, every morning, like, how's your heart? Do you feel love in it? Do you have the capacity for love? And so, like, that's why I will offer all the black and brown men is to check on their hearts intentionally. And I love what you said, Gro. If you don't have the words to love you, like, reach out to us and we can support you with giving you language on how to love you or some steps on how to love you intentionally. That's like this is why we're doing this because we want our black and brown man to be more intentional on how you treat you.
Before we leave, let this land somewhere gentle. The wandering was never a failure. It was wisdom doing its best with what it had. It kept you alive. It kept you curious. It kept your heart open even when you got tired. But survival does not have to be your only language anymore. If your body is ready, if your spirit is willing, you can rest. You don't have to wander no more. Not because the journey was wrong, but because you have arrived in yourself. Let the road loosen its grip. Let your feet feel the ground beneath them. Home does not mean perfect, it means present.